Hi guitarlings, I'm Gray at Hub Guitar. Today we're going to get ready for nap time with what's probably the most well-known lullaby in the entire world, which is the lullaby written by Brahms, arranged for solo fingerstyle guitar. So whether you want to put on some relaxing music or maybe soothe a baby who's trying to go to sleep, I hope that you'll enjoy this arrangement. Here we go. Alright, so right away in the beginning, we're going to take our pinky finger and put that on the 4th fret of the 3rd string. And you might be wondering, why would I do that? And this is why it's so helpful to have a little bit of foresight as we plan our fingerings. So I want my pinky finger to do that note, so that then when I assemble the chord coming in measure 1, I don't have to lift it up. And the reason I don't want to lift it up, 1, I want that note to sustain. I don't want that note to die. That doesn't make for very good acoustic guitar music. I want that note to last a while and give the impression of a bigger and fuller sound. Maybe make people feel like there's more than one instrument playing. So I'm going to start with my pinky on the 4th fret of the 3rd string. Pluck that twice and hold that there, and then I'm going to put my 2nd finger on the 3rd fret of the big string, and I'm going to put my 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the 2nd string. Now on the 2nd half of beat 1 of measure 1, I've got to get my index finger on the 2nd fret of the 5th string. So altogether I have all 4 of my fingers down now. And now I can just pluck out the rest of that chord for the entire measure 1. Don't move my left hand after I've got that chord in place for the duration of measure 1. In fact, for measure 2, I can actually reuse a lot of that as well. As you might have noticed, I didn't lift my hand up at all for the entirety of measure 2. So it's really important to see where you can do that, because it's going to help your guitar playing sound a lot more smooth when you're doing less of picking up and reorganizing and shuffling around your fingers. At measure 3, I do have to pick up some stuff and change, but I keep my 2nd finger on the 3rd fret of the big string for the whole measure. So I start with my 2nd finger on the 3rd fret of the big string, and I've got my 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the high E string. I hold those down, I pluck them, and then I play strings 2 and 3 open. Now I shift my 1st finger down to the 2nd fret of the 1st string, lifting up the 3rd fret, and pluck that with an open string. Notice that my other finger is still on the big string, and then I pluck strings 2 and 3 again, and then I pluck the open 4th string again. And try to take note, there's a lot of jangly, kind of clanging open strings in there, and you don't want the melody to go away. So if you need to, you can actually cut away some of those interior notes. If that helps you to produce a more clear melody. The idea is you don't want to overpower the melody with those interior notes. So keep that in mind. You always want to be able to hear your melody, because your melody is what keeps people kind of glued to what you're doing. Now we've reached measure 4. Now it would have been nice if somewhere during measure 3 I could have switched my 2nd finger with my 3rd finger, because that's just going to be a little bit better. So sometime around the end of measure 3, I'm probably going to somehow get my 3rd finger ready onto the 3rd fret of the 6th string for measure 4. I pluck that with the open string, and then I use my index finger to grab the first fret of the second string. Now take note here, there's actually a fingering mark written on the sheet music. Whenever a composer or arranger gives you fingering marks, there's probably a pretty good reason. You don't have to obey them as if they are law, but you probably shouldn't ignore them either. So the reason that's there is because that's really the best way to grab all of the notes that are coming up. So this is starting on beat 2 of measure 4. I've got my second finger on the 3rd fret, and I pluck that with an open string. I put my 3rd finger on the 4th fret of the 4th string, and then I put my index finger on the 2nd fret of the 3rd string. Right at the end of that measure, I lift up my middle finger, which had been on the 2nd string, clearing the way for that open string. And then I shift down to this shape here on measure 5. So now I've got my index finger for measure 5 on the 1st fret of the 2nd string and my 3rd finger on the 3rd fret. That gives me just a moment's time to get my middle finger onto the 2nd fret of the 3rd string. And right at the end of that, I lift up my index finger again for that open string. Pretty similar for measure 6. And then for measure 7. Notice that the kind of timing shifts around a little bit. I've got 8th note, 8th note, quarter note. So quarter notes are twice as long as 8th notes, so you should hear this. Da, 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 da. And then it kind of goes back to its original pace. So for the measure 7, I start with my 2nd finger on the 3rd fret of the big string, with my index finger on the 2nd fret of the high E string. Then I open that up and I put my 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the 2nd string and play that with the open 4th string. I'm probably going to lift up my finger which had been on the bass just because that helps me maneuver a little bit, but it would be ideal not to. You just got to kind of balance yourself, decide what's best in what case. And then I'm going back to that shape that I started out with on measure 7, which is the 2nd fret of the 1st string and the 3rd fret of the 6th string, and then I'm resolving that to G. So beats 1 and 2 of measure 8, just a G chord, G and G on the outside, B, D, and back to B. So I've got a G chord here and I'm just plucking around it. At the end of that measure we shift to G7, but notice that I still keep the same 2nd finger on the 3rd fret of the big string. So that's kind of becoming a popular theme here, which is that if I don't need to move a finger, I don't want to move a finger. Now we're going to the second half to measure 9. So this is actually just a C major chord. We start with our 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the 5th string, that's a C, and put our pinky on the 3rd fret of the high E string, that's a G, and then we take our 2nd finger and put that on the 2nd fret of the 4th string for an E, and follow that with an open G. Open E on the outside again, the 1st string, and 1st fret of the 2nd string. So at the end of that measure I do a little bit of shifting, but notice that my 2nd and my 3rd fingers are still in the same place that they were. Right? I don't want to lift these up if I don't have to, because it's going to create better sustain. So for measure 10 we've got a G chord. So we should be pretty familiar with how to do that. We've got our 4th finger on the 3rd fret of the 2nd string and our 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the 6th string. And I've got my 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the 5th string. I'm just plucking around that. Then I lift up the 2nd string and open 3rd string. So open 2nd, open 3rd. Then for measure 11, it's really important to pay attention to the fingering, because if you don't, it could get quite awkward. So we're going to start with our 2nd finger on the 1st fret of the 2nd string and our 3rd finger on the 2nd fret of the 3rd string. And there's a reason for that. Because we play those 2 notes, then we play an open 4th string, and then those 2 notes go up, and we use the same fingering. And we need to do that so that we have a finger available to reach the 3rd fret of the 5th string. We follow that with an open E string, and then we move the index finger down to the 2nd fret of the 5th string. So it's a little bit awkward, but with some practice it'll be fine. Then we just go back to that G idea again. For measure 13 we've got a C chord, And you don't really need to have the second fret of the fourth string ready to go on beat 1, because you can do it on the end of beat 1. So I just start with my third finger on the third fret of the fifth string, my index finger on the first fret of the second string, and my pinky finger on the third fret of the high E string, and I pluck strings 5, 3, 2, and 1. And then I get that second fret note with my remaining finger, which is my middle finger. And we just pluck around that, lift up for the open string, and then move our index finger to grab the first string. Note again that fingers that don't need to move do not move. Measure 14 goes back to a G chord, with a lot of little open notes in there. And now we're ready to end it. So right about here, because this is the ending, you could start to slow down. So you put your index finger on the first fret of the second string and your second finger on the second fret of the sixth string. You can drag that on a little bit if you like. Now slide up to the third fret with your second finger and pluck that with the open second string. And then lift up all your fingers and really try to give yourself the time you need to form this chord. This chord is pretty stretchy. If you find this chord difficult on beat 3 of measure 15, don't be shy about trying a capo. If you put a capo on the second fret, this will probably be a lot easier to play. I've got my index finger on the second fret of the third string, open fourth string. I've got my second finger on the third fret of the fifth string, and my pinky on the fifth fret of the sixth string. So it's a pretty stretchy chord. And then I actually have to put my third finger down on the fourth fret of the open string, the fourth string. So if you're having trouble with that chord, just kind of let go of it and just do it a bunch of times. Remember that you don't need to have it all ready at once, so practice just getting these first 3 notes ready without your third finger. And do what I call chord push-ups, just to familiarize yourself with that chord shape. And because it's the end of the tune, there's a little bit of a slowing down effect that's appropriate in most tunes, especially a tune like this. You can take all the time you need. And that would sound pretty natural. At measure 16, we've just got a G major chord. And then we can pause a little bit and then grab that upper octave, the G, on the third fret of the first string. So for those of you who are still awake, that was the Brahms Lullaby for solo fingerstyle guitar. I hope you enjoyed the lesson, and thanks very much for watching.